We ready to go?
Oh yeah, we're recording, we're good.
All right. Next talk here, we got Rockie Brockway, and he's going to be talking about the business ramifications of the internet's unclean conflicts.
Thank you very much. So I've been told I should stand here and not wander around like Mick and some of the other guys. So, hi. My name is Rockie. I've been in the InfoSec community for about 2 decades now, and I do business risk these days. What I'm going to be talking about is a lot of weird stuff that I'm not really sure I've completely convinced myself that I can connect all the dots here, but I'm going to give it the old college try. So yeah, what am I talking about? Okay. Actually, sorry. Disclaimer. This talk is not a box popper talk. It's not a cool tool talk, and I'm actually going to do something odd, which is going to venture into some generic politics while we talk about the overall business environment and how that relates to how we've been kind of, over the last several decades, from a business perspective, kind of trained to think. I fully expect arguments, and I welcome them. And I think what I'm going to try to do at the end of this is perhaps go through an exercise where we kind of maybe talk about some suggestions about what I'm actually going to end up, from a results perspective, talking about. So, off we go. June 5th, 1942. Does anybody know what this date actually represents? No. 1942 was the last United States declaration of war. Okay. And it was against Bulgaria, Romania, and Hungary. Since then, we have been involved as a country in what we call unclean conflicts. No declaration of war. So obviously, Korea, Vietnam are very, we know lots about those. But the whole point here, though, is that all of these kind of conflicts, were never really officially sanctioned from a declaration of war perspective, and therefore are considered unclean. Now, since then, this event happened on this date. Does anybody know what this date represents? Yes, Christmas. But the year. Christmas, go ahead. Excellent, thank you. Yeah, this date represented the official dissolution of the Soviet Union. Now, again, I'm going to be talking about lots of vicarious things, and I'm really going to try hard to tie them all in. But since that has happened, we've been involved in even more unclean conflicts as a country, okay? What basically happened after the fall of the Soviet Union is this mindset that we, as a country, was so strong that after that, there was no real viable threat, okay? At least from the terms of global conflict, okay? And what I've kind of come to the realization of over the last couple of decades is that this mentality has really filtered into the DNA of all of our business culture and environments, okay? And we think about things in a specific manner without thinking outside of the box and realizing that the way we are actively, the way we expect things to behave and to act, not only from a international perspective, but more importantly from a business perspective, we're not seeing the big picture. And what that leads to is this organizational entropy. the natural result of assuming you are smarter than your adversaries. Okay? And that, in and of itself, is A, lazy, but B, dangerous. All right? So when we apply this concept of organizational entropy to business, we now have business culture that basically assumes that we're smarter than our competition, but the net result is similar to what has happened, where not only do our corporations basically are defining how the world conducts business, right? It's the same way. The ramifications here, realistically, is that the rest of the world doesn't see it like that. Okay? And I'll give a really easy example. China. Okay? It's a big target. But when you talk about China, I found this out recently, that 18 out of the 20 last centuries, China has been the world's largest economy. We're kind of a blip on the radar right now, as far as they're concerned. And we don't really kind of consciously think about things like that. I know India was in there a little bit as well, but in China, there's very little difference between corporate business culture and actual government ownership. It's so intermingled, where we in this country, we have our corporations, we have our, this infrastructure is our business infrastructure, and this infrastructure is our actual government infrastructure. Again, from a strategic perspective, when you are tasked with protecting the assets of your business, if you're not cognizant of how other people think differently than you, you're going to have a really bad day. The traditional concept of spies, where we think of the spy, Chinese don't think like that at all. They have an entire population of very educated people that come over to either this country or other vicarious countries that, if they just happen to have access to even non-sensitive information, there's kind of a nationalistic duty to take that data and get it back to the mother country. That's not spying. That's not the way we think about spying. That's a nationalistic culture. And we don't have that in any way, shape, or form. Our version of nationalism... Oh, okay, absolutely. See, I knew arguments were going to be expected. Say that again?
Our government definitely supports our business.
Sure.
I mean, you can even look at it in history. Like the Pinkertons were working with the government to put down workers. We have Blackwater. I mean, the government's outsourcing so much.
Yeah.
We're all intermixed. If you look at our politicians, a lot of them come out of business. We're just as intermixed.
No. I don't buy it. And here's why, right?
Yeah.
You can take entities, all right, business entities that produce things that, the innovation that comes out of our country that basically makes our economy as, what it is today, right? You can say that there's funding for some of that stuff, but the differences here are that and again, the example being China, right? That, you can't separate the government, the government involvement, and there's no distinction. There's literally no distinction.
I mean, there's a lot of, I think it's Airbus is accused our government of spying on contracts so that Boeing wins.
Right.
I think it's just an outsider's perspective. I can imagine they're saying the same thing about us.
Interesting.
We steal stuff or we share stuff for personal profit. In the Chinese mindset, they'll do stuff for national pride, national
To a degree. No, to a degree, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I totally, I see what you're getting at. Absolutely.
I guess I'm saying we're doing the same thing, and I don't know if you can. I don't think
That's a good point. We're absolutely talking about apples and oranges, but that's my point. We're talking about apples and oranges. I don't.
Have you been to China? No. Okay. Actually, that's about what's more in China, and I can honestly say the commitment that has the government is completely different than what we do.
Absolutely.
In Australia, and I'm researching something, I don't have a commitment to give that to the United States. Okay. And I work for the United States military for 5 years, about the United States Marine Corps. Okay. I'm not going to find something groundbreaking thing and pass it over to the FBI or to the NSA or the CIA.
And it doesn't even have to be groundbreaking either, Dave.
I guess I just don't see the brand of different. Government's asking somebody to be back.
Right. Yeah. I mean, comparatively, compared to that level of nationalism, okay, our version of nationalism is what? Building a wall on, in Mexico.
I guess I just
Right?
say that we're not on that scale. I would argue that we're just maybe not as extreme, but to make it binary, I feel.
Sure.
Make it out.
I'm glad this is going this way because I really expected good arguments. Sir.
So maybe this is a dangerous question to ask in this company, but I'll do it. So for example, has anybody in this room, by show of hands, broken into Chinese government or Chinese company to steal information? The sole purpose of turning it back over to the U.S. government, raise your hand. Okay, I know where he worked for the government, in the government, I know why, but outside of people that work for certain agencies that have a certain number of letters in their name. I mean, the average U.S. citizen, I would pose, does not break into a foreign entity's government or a foreign company to turn around and then give that information to the U.S. government.
Absolutely. Yeah, and this is the environment, right?
I went into the government with secrets from China. The U.S. government would put me in prison.
That you would have.
Yes, because we don't condone state-sponsored espionage.
Right.
France, China, India does.
Yep. And you can't call it state sanctioned either. The stuff that's going on, that the majority of the stuff that's, I'm going to go out on a limb and say the majority of the stuff that's going on right now isn't necessarily state sponsored. It's, hey, in response to the bombing of whatever Chinese embassy, I forget, Serbia or something like that, a number of years ago, we're going to DDoS this government website. That's not state sponsored, okay? That's that level of nationalism that I'm referring to. And it's huge, it's gigantic. And the other thing that we don't have is this, in our DNA, this whole concept of, they've been living and breathing the art of war for thousands of years now, right? So the flaw in the logic, in our logic, is basically what country in their right mind would actively come up, from a global war perspective, when you can achieve probably better goals through small-scale conflicts, espionage, and/or terrorism. From a business perspective, there you go. Why spend billions of dollars developing the technology when you can purchase stolen technology for $1 million? It's a business case, Our role in information security, clearly, we all know what we do here, but let's put it down into a little elevator statement. Our role is to prevent loss of both replaceable and irreplaceable data. Josh Corman, if anybody knows who he is, he's a security guy. I think he's at Akamai, but I'm not positive. I'm not sure if he originated this concept, but I'll attribute it to him because I didn't do it. Replaceable versus irreplaceable data, okay? You have this concept, and he poignantly points out that in our country, the majority of our compliance frameworks are focused on protecting replaceable data, right? Social security numbers, they're replaceable. Credit card numbers, they're replaceable. okay? The innovations and intellectual properties, you know, that's irreplaceable data. Once that's out, it's not coming back and you can't replace it. So there's a really, I agree with this. It's the wrong focus. We're focusing on the wrong data sets and data types. And that applies then obviously to all of the businesses that fall under any one of those various frameworks. We're not protecting the right data, or at least we're not being legislated from a compliance perspective. And when you talk, go ahead.
Didn't you say, though, that the economic interest in protecting that irreplaceable data is sufficient to provide motivation to protect it appropriately?
Say that again.
That the information is valuable enough to the person that needs to protect it that they would take ethics measures.
Are you asking if I would assume that's the case? No. No, I mean, and I think it was Mick Douglas. I think it was Mick, the previous presentation, where, you know, his point is, look, how many organizations have actually gone out of business when when this replaceable or irreplaceable data has actually been taken? Yeah, I mean, there's a couple, okay? Right. Right. Yeah. So there's a cost of doing business here that something like that, especially if you're investing in whatever type of data insurance may exist that is relevant, hey, that's an acceptable business cost. It's, yeah, I mean, I'm not saying I necessarily agree, but it kind of is what it is, right? From a legislative perspective, I heard an interesting point the other day. Our adversaries who are developing all these great tools like well, you know, and Dave's not an adversary, but, you know, tools like that, right? Technically, are 2 years away from. The adversaries who are developing these tools to get a lot of this of our, you know, business innovation technology are 2 years ahead of the developers. The developers are typically 2 years ahead of the buyers, people who want that, okay? And the buyers are typically 2 years ahead of legislation. There's another 2 years, and I forgot something. But basically, there can be up to a 10-year gap between the time something is actually, you know, developed for potentially nefarious purposes to by the time it actually gets through and gets noticed enough that, oh wow, now we need legislation on it. And again, going back to that point that, well, our legislation is focused on all the wrong data. And the real big one here, you know, from an elevator pitch perspective, is our role is to protect the brand, okay? And we all understand the ramifications of not doing this, and there are different levels of, you know, of ramifications: identity theft, monetary loss. I think it was Richard Clark who came up with the acronym CHEW in terms of addressing and identifying threat vectors, right? You've got criminal, you've got hacktivism, you've got espionage, and you've got warfare. Okay, I mean, that's probably a decent, you know, 30,000 foot picture of the threat, you know, the actual threat vector. But even recently, I've seen the introduction of even a new vector where organizations, in order to potentially potentially win gigantic billion-dollar bids from China. This one was from China. So I'm an American company, and I want to win a $2 billion whatever bid to perform work in China. I'm actually going to give them classified information to show them that we know what we're doing, and potentially, to a degree, bribe them to give them a billion, whatever, $2 billion contract. That popped up in the news last week. Right. So, I mean, from a vector perspective, yeah, it's not static, and we're seeing new ones all the time. But I mean, I've done a couple of times now a talk on security economics and how all of this, from a business perspective, all of this theft of innovation, all of this, especially manufacturing, especially science and research. I'll talk about it in a few slides, but we are not doing a good job of protecting data that's being developed before it gets into, let's say, military classified type technology, right? All that stuff that's being developed at the university level, right? Is anybody in here involved in any type of higher ed from a security perspective or network perspective? Anybody? Yes. So how secure is your network? Just, roughly. You got to think about it. Wait a minute. It's your types of networks though are just a brutally hard environment to really secure. You can't, yeah. And that's where a lot of this technology is being developed, and so again, focusing not on the right places. All of what we deal with it from an InfoSec perspective and a business risk perspective are really, subsets of a big information problem, which includes things such as, the transparency of government. I mean, it's all related, okay? And especially when I'm trying to, connect these dots between, look, we became such an egotistical country after the fall of the Soviet Union, and all that filtered into the way we conduct business, and now we're like, oh, wow, why are we being attacked from these different weird vectors, and how are we losing all of our intellectual property? So all of this, especially this environment today, policy, and I talked about policy earlier, from a compliance perspective, but policy is dictating society, which is completely backwards. And I don't really have a solution for this one because that's a big problem, but we're not addressing the real issues. To a degree, when we are accepting this type of policy defining how society acts, as opposed to society defining policy. I'm not sure if that made sense. Did that make any sense whatsoever? That's, yeah, ish. All right. And this is where I'm probably going to get in the most trouble, where I'm going to get into from a generic, and look, I don't do any type of bipartisan politics or whatever, right? There's no political party for me. But from a generic politics perspective, this is really, to a degree, where some of these root causes are coming from, right? We're dictating how we think people should act, right? And again, from a business perspective, we're also assuming that other businesses are going to act accordingly to the way we act. And that's, it's all intertwined here, and that's what, personally, I think, has to change in order for us, from just a generic national economy perspective, to kind of right the ship. We've got time. It's not like, oh, wow, the fall of Rome is tomorrow, But, hey, look, everybody in here knows the media coverage of everything that's been happening over the last 2-3 years is just getting, the previous presenter, Mick, was talking about. It's all these fires now. Yeah, and so at some point, all of these people who are defining either from a politics, from a government, from a business perspective, all these people who are defining these kind of like standards of how we are supposed to conduct business or act or whatever, they're going to, at some point when the shit hits the fan, going to be like, whoa, you were supposed to protect us. and that's infuriating for, I'm seeing a lot of people nodding their heads here. But when the root causes, right, are driven by that whole greed, ego, power, it's eye-opening when you think about it to a degree, and maybe I'm not saying anything new or different, but here's where it gets, from my perspective, and I'm talking a lot about, I know I'm talking a lot about just stuff that sucks, and I promise I'll try to at least suggest some things going forward, but one of the things that we all have to realize now is that we are living in an environment where it's harder and harder to keep secrets, whatever those secrets might be. Okay? Passwords, intellectual property, formulas, etc. All of this, it's harder and harder to protect for long periods of time. It's just a reality that we all basically have to accept. So now, how do we engineer and design solutions that take this into consideration, right? and yeah, like I said, there's a need to protect information before it gets to that level of, blueprints to some, military grade helicopter. Well, the software actually was designed by a kid coming out of Cal State, and the Chinese already have it. By the time that software actually got into a military grade helicopter, it's already done. It's already gone. So, I want to talk a little bit about adaptability. Okay. There's a lot of talk at a lot of different conventions about these solutions that we can apply. Data loss prevention, protect against bring your own device, etc. It's all these different solutions, right? If last year 92% of the breaches went undetected, well, and bearing in mind, and I fully expect a few more arguments here, I'm not actually advocating that less detection is the way to go, but if 92% of these, events, breaches went undetected, and everybody's still kind of conducting business, is that where we need to focus? I don't know, right? Same with firewalls, right? I'm not advocating, or antivirus. I know several people in this room understand and fully predict that antivirus technology is completely on its way out. Okay? That firewalls, sure, they serve a good purpose in a network, right? But based on all of these different, avenues, vectors, mechanisms of getting data from an organization, is that really, a pillar of your network infrastructure anymore? I don't know. To adapt is really what needs to happen, not adding all these different protections against the latest whatever, acronym. Got to leave your comfort zone. And the only way, has anybody read this book, Learning from the Octopus? It's a spectacular book about, and the guy who wrote it is this biologist, and he worked in government for a while. he was an advisor. He was a science advisor to some congresswoman or something like that. But his whole premise is what can we learn from nature from an adaptation perspective? Okay, for millions and millions of years, nature has successfully developed security controls within its own through adaptation, not by throwing a firewall on it or whatever. I mean, he doesn't outright come out and say that, but you know, I will. You know, so all of these vicarious systems that are available to us to solve problems, that's not adapting to the current, you know, environment that we are facing today, which is completely fluid and moving and changing every day. And, you know, from again, a 30,000-foot generic political perspective, vote. I'm sorry. All of this stuff about non-protection of data, anything that you know is non-protection of data, non-protection of innovation, not addressing existing economic issues, anything else a politician might, it's smokescreen. I'm sorry. It's not important. This stuff is important. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. The exercise that I would like to try to, you know, to go through here is, all right, let's talk about adaptability, and what, can anybody give me maybe an example of something that you would consider adapting to this environment, this kind of new environment, that isn't, you know, tool-based or you know, or what have you. Anybody?
One of the key problems with Darwin, things that adapt because their environment gave them the diversity that they had to deal with.
Right.
The replaceable data, my credit card. If I lose my credit card, I can see money coming out of my pocket. That is pain. I will adapt. I'll get legislation, stop taking my credit card. Irreplaceable data, they take some intellectual property. It's hard for my board of directors to see, hey, 92% of our computers got breached, we lost data. They can't feel the pain because they can't see the money coming out of their pocket, and they don't see that they might have lost market share. They don't see that they might have lost this because my company still had an 8% return, we still grew market share, and we're still continuing developing new things. So we got breached. We lost that irreplaceable data, but it didn't feel like money got out of my pocket, so I didn't feel any pain. So it doesn't encourage an adaptive mode. But you mean really, because you have to have diversity to adapt over. And I'm kind of saying, I don't think my board of directors and presidents see a computer breach or loss of data as painful enough.
No, not at all. All right.
By the time they feel it's too late.
Bingo.
Yeah. You know, so I guess that you know, from my perspective, that poses the question, right? As InfoSec practitioners, you know, I know not everybody in here is, you know, in InfoSec, but is it our responsibility then to go outside the box, get out of our comfort zone, and figure out how can we adapt these solutions to, you know, better protect our innovations?
I need pay. Because right now, I can say, hey, I got PCI, I've got regulatory, so I can get budget to go to stuff, I can get budget and initiative to solve the replaceable data. But it's really hard for me to get someone in a research and development to just classify the document with a watermark, save it in this directory. That's impossible for me to do for some reason.
Well, I think if you look at regulatory compliance, not necessarily across the security industry, I think
No.
what we've seen is you've got people that, you know, kind of came from the ropes of the business side, trying to apply controls in place of a security program, and that, you know, compliance becomes a security program, right?
Right.
But if you use PCI or, you know, any type of regulatory requirement as a mechanism to start putting control in
Right.
a lot better than 90% of the companies out there, and it's the true niceness in the industry, is the evolution of compliance really opening the eyes, and this is weird for me, you know, I say like, and I compliance guy. You see compliance really opening the eyes of businesses of what they actually have to do, and the reason why they experience pain points is because they do lose consumer data and customer business. You know, and so it's going to take a gradual evolution to get to it, but as security guys, it's just a matter of getting the business guys to say,
Yeah, like I sold ISO 27000, not because, oh, it's going to make our data more secure, but I said, if we're ISO, we can move into European markets and partner with other companies faster and easier because they trust us, they'll share information with us, our acquisitions are smoother. So they didn't care that ISO protected data. They liked the fact that ISO might give us a competitive advantage in the marketplace and allows us to move into new territories and be more global.
Sure.
you're seeing security as a major differentiator for companies to be able to say, hey, you know, our product is superior because we have security.
Yeah, I think security, selling security through uptime, performance, productivity gains. If we keep selling security as FUD, we're not going to get so far.
You know something? The UD of FUD, I'm with you on that. But fear is good.
You need fear, but it needs to not
I'm sorry, it is.
be hacker. It needs to be fear of the market,
Fear of lost revenue.
loss of revenue.
Absolutely.
Can I just ask a question? When Anonymous was reaching every single company out there last year, did you guys get more funding?
Raise your hand if you got more funding.
A lot of us did. I mean, the fear and certainty gets out. It must be nice when Anonymous is also getting that was exponential.
Yeah.
It was great being in the wall, having the security in the Wall Street Journal. It's on the CEO's desk.
Yeah, yeah.
And he calls, he's like, so, what's this mean? And that starts the conversation.
It means you have to open your pocketbooks. Al?
Yeah, I was just going to point out two things. One is that when you start hearing, when you start using analogies, we can kind of get in trouble. If you talk about, Darwin and evolution, in my lifetime, I've never seen any natural organism evolve, right? I mean, so we're talking, security is only, what, 30, I mean, IT.
Yeah.
Even before it was called IT, is only 40 years old.
Sure.
And so, yeah, right. So let's just say we're not involved, right? Number one. And the second thing is in terms of the security piece of it, previously I had worked at a bank, a large bank, and people see things. We're in a capitalist country, and we're proud of that. We're talking about nationalism and stuff, and spying and things like that. Something we're proud of is that somebody can set up a lemonade stand.
Sure.
And make money and not have to pay tax, that kind of thing. So that's something built in our culture. We're going to look at the upside and downside risk financially. That's what we've been doing as capitalists. And so the notion of, it's a lot more, what you bring up is a lot more complicated in saying, intellectual property and competitive advantage over a long term, when my upside is I can make money and retire next quarter.
Yep.
So that's what drives business.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. I completely agree with that. And so, to a degree, that's almost a battle that may not ever, be quote won, Yep, absolutely.
Because like I was saying, with the pain, we don't feel the pain. My company, we still have good returns, we still see growth. But I'm trying to, there was a great article written where it said, we have more growth. Why is China at 10%? Because they're taking our ideas and our innovation.
Yeah.
There's one thing I should have said, the working division of the FBI that gave a presentation consistently. America's intellectual property is estimated like $360 trillion a year. And, it's all being flown away. At least it's the majority of it.
Yeah. Again, why spend billions of dollars developing it when you can spend $1 million buying it stolen? Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, and that's a good point, because this is all it is a big business, right? Whether you're talking about the crime aspect of it, and let's say our Eastern European and Russian crime organizations profiting, so that's the profit business model from the volume of credit card numbers that they can, suck out of organizations these days, versus, the business of, espionage and making your country competitive. That's a business model.
Well, I mean, a good use case of why it's extremely difficult to implement something like that is if you look at music piracy, is that it's not stopped. Some people argue that it encourages things, but take that as that is intellectual property to some extent, right?
Right.
The business didn't stop that, right? The RIA didn't stop anything. What you saw were businesses adapt to the fact that people were going to steal music, and that if they could make a business model around that and make it cheaper and easier just to pay a buck for a song, people are going to do that, and generally people are going to do the right thing. People will do that rather than try to steal it.
Yeah.
So that to me is the stakes aren't as high, but it's a very concrete example.
It's a great example of adaptation in business. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So.
I guess this whole point of all this too is, what have we been taught as people in business around what actually causes the reform of our companies? What are the breaches that we can do to data, to distribution? That's where places are looking at, right? I've never seen any large-scale breaches for intellectual property.
Well, that was the other.
Requirements that was that if someone were to break into the building and steal either company X that has their company secrets go out the door, why are they going to make a press release about that?
Right.
Now the SEC is requiring companies to disclose dangerous material, information that has material impact on that profit.
I got a great counter example.
That's so unfair, because that simply states publicly, privately held companies have zero
Right.
obligation to report any other than. That's true, but it's all impact.
Right.
7 minutes.
Around my talk, I think it was like 5-6 years ago, Goldman Sachs lost their most valuable high-speed trading algorithm.
Right.
Went right out the door. People got the highest bonuses that year as normal, And so that blew my mind. I couldn't get that, right? So that's intellectual property. That's a core business of Goldman Sachs. And they didn't miss a beat.
Yep.
So,
How much of the problem are we facing in your first slide? You were saying the culture. Because our country has no fear, we have no natural enemy. We all, as Americans, don't fear anything.
Well, what I think is going to happen, though, Jack, is that we're going to be pushed. We're going to be pushed into a situation where you are going to start feeling pain, right? And so, just like every reactionary, situation on the planet, we're going to keep on doing business as usual, and shit's going to happen, and that's going to force something, and that you're going to feel pain, and at some point, they'll probably even legislate stuff or whatever. It's.
Until all of the individuals in my company question is what I'm doing okay? Should I bring my laptop with all my data to China with me? Should I install this BitTorrent client on my laptop and use it while I'm in China with all my company data on it?
Right. Yeah.
If they are worried and they're like, I better lock my car, they're not worried about locking their laptop.
Yeah. All right, I gotta get out of here. But here's what I want. The final thing, right? So, I guess takeaways, right? What are really the root causes of what we're seeing here, and how can we adapt to that? That's really what I wanted to talk about, and hopefully, you'll leave with some of that in your brain. All right, hey, thanks everybody for hanging out, and I appreciate it. Thanks.
Guys, feel free to take the conversation outside here. Yeah, good job. Okay, you can do that. No, seriously, sorry that conversation.
Yeah. Interesting. I wasn't sure I was even able to pull it off, but.
Don't forget your tussle.
Yeah, right.